Welcome to the finalist voting for the Maven Churn Challenge. This was actually our second challenge in a row that we had over 300 entrants for, which is amazing, especially because the data set for this one actually had a few nuances that kind of had to be discovered by analyzing it in depth, which made it even more impressive this time around, I think. Now, for this challenge, entrants were asked to assume the role of a consultant that had just been hired to help a telecommunications company improve retention by identifying high-value customers and churn risks. And then they had to present their findings to the CMO in the form of a single-page report or dashboard. And to do that, they had to analyze the data set of the company's customers from Q2 2022 with details on their demographics, their location in California, the services they had hired with the company, and their status by the end of the quarter, which could be either churned, stayed, or joined. But where we actually saw entrants slip a bit in their analysis was in two fields in particular, which was total revenue and offer in this case. And the first of these was actually addressed by Gerard Duggan in a LinkedIn post. And he was asking whether people, when they were considering the total revenue field, whether they considered it the revenue for the previous quarter, which was kind of what the whole data set was about, or over each customer's tenure as a whole. Now, the way that total revenue was described as in the data dictionary was that it indicates the company's total revenue for this customer calculated to the end of the quarter specified above, which in this case was Q2 2022. So it doesn't actually explicitly answer Gerard's question, but if we do look closely at the data, then the answer actually does become clearer. So this is a scatter plot that I quickly put together that just shows total revenue and tenure for each customer in the data set. And it's actually easy to see here that as tenure increases, then the total revenue generated by each customer increases accordingly. And the shape just starts to get wider as the tenure increases as well, because it's just caused by the difference in the monthly payments for each customer, basically. And for further proof, if we actually take the average monthly charges by dividing total charges and tenure, which is in months, and then just plot that against charges for the previous month, for each customer, then we get an almost perfect correlation, as long as we don't consider the customers on the left that we can see here that had negative discounted charges on the previous months. So with this considered, I think it's safe to say that any field that had the word total in it, like Gerard was addressing, it actually included the customer's entire tenure, not just the previous quarter, which is something that, again, people had to kind of discover for themselves as it wasn't explicitly stated in the data set, which I actually think made it a little bit more real world. We've had people in the past kind of think that maybe they're a little detached from reality because we kind of provided really clean data sets that you wouldn't really encounter out there. I thought this was a really good scenario of them kind of having to find these nuances in the data themselves to make an accurate analysis. Now, the second detail actually had to do with the offer field, and this was defined in the data dictionary as the last marketing offer that each customer had accepted. And what we noticed is that people assumed that these offers were being offered simultaneously, and then they were making their recommendations accordingly. But once again, if we look closely at the data in these two charts here, the first clue kind of tells us that these offers were actually being offered in different periods of time. So you'll see in the first chart that customers only joined accepted offer E or no offer at all. And if we look at the tenures for the offers, we'll see that they actually don't overlap. So that actually makes it hard to make apples to apples comparisons for the churn rates by the offer accepted, since there's another variable affecting the result, which is actually the tenure. So again, that was another kind of thing that you had to notice, that these weren't simultaneous by looking at the data. And if you didn't, it actually led to some kind of erroneous recommendations from some people if they hadn't noticed this. So what we've done up until this point is use the criteria from the challenge prompt and these two pitfalls that I just highlighted to evaluate all the entries and then narrow them down to the 10 finalists that we're going to talk about now so that we can select a winner. So slightly longer introduction than usual. Again, slightly more challenging data set than usual. But with that, we can get started. The first finalist in this one is actually Gerard, who's been a finalist in every single challenge this year, which is really impressive. And what's even more impressive is that to me, this was actually my favorite entry of his for any challenge so far. And you'll notice right off the bat that he he split up his analysis into two segments, one that profiles the customers that stayed or churned at the top, and another that profiles or identifies which of these profiles the newly joined customers kind of fit into. We've seen him do this in a bunch of challenges already, and I think it works really well here. And to kind of do that, or to profile them, he developed two metrics himself that really fit the challenge prompt. So one was to identify the high value customers, and the other was to identify the churn risks. Now, I'm not going to go into detail into how he calculated each one. I'm sure he's going to do a video on that himself at some point. But what was interesting to me is that he actually applied some of the concepts from part 2 of our machine learning course, which is really cool. So what he did with those is he plotted each customer on a scatter plot that we can see at the top here, that uses these two metrics as the axes. And he noticed that many high value customers that stayed with the company actually have very similar characteristics to the customers that churned, meaning that they are potentially at risk. And on the bar chart that you can see on the right here, he actually shows what those characteristics are that lead to a high risk factor, which I actually think was a really clever way to combine many different fields into just a single visual. You'll see that he's got, the type of contract, the different, internet services that they have, their payment methods, their number of referrals, all in just a single bar chart, which was really cool because it's all tied to the customer's churn risk. And what he does next is just to plot the new customers on that same scatter plot, and actually notices that most of them actually fit a high risk profile, which is really concerning for the company. And finally, his recommendations on the bottom right there just really do a great job of tying everything together. My favorite of those being that he suggested creating a new quarterly contract. So right now we only have month to month, yearly, or bi-yearly. And I didn't see anyone else do that. And he also offered kind of bundling at reduced rate for the premium internet services, since those were really high risk factors as well if they didn't have some of those hired, like online security or premium tech support. Now, if I did have to offer any constructive feedback, I'd probably say that his KPIs on the left could be a little bit clearer. It's hard to gain anything from them, like just at a glance. But I still really like how he kind of split them up into that kind of matrix form, and used the colors as a legend for the charts. It is worth mentioning as well that he didn't fall into any of the pitfalls from the dataset, which I just think makes this entry that much better. Again, not a surprise from Gerard, but it's good to see that he just keeps on surprising us and improving with each challenge.
All right. So one of the things that we talk about constantly at Maven in terms of the role of the analyst is value and adding value. And one of the things that I love about Mina's entire analysis is the focus on value. And it starts at the top. We have some very key top line statistics focused on things like monthly recurring revenue, lifetime value, et cetera. And these are statistics that executives care about. So I really like that this was folded into Mina's analysis. The other thing that I like is that we have several clear sections in terms of the angle we're looking at this data from. So we have churn risks as well as a focus on high value customers at the bottom. So if I'm a decision maker, I can kind of walk through this problem of churn and not only understand what are the risks in terms of churn, but I also get some nice recommendations and a focus on which customers, if we have to choose, should we focus on saving. And so I think the story of this dashboard overall is very clear. A couple of things that I think might improve this a little bit is actually embracing the concept that less is more. So we have tons of metrics across this dashboard. And oftentimes some of the really interesting insights get lost in the sea of various bar charts. We have over 10 bar charts on this piece. And I think if Mina had focused a little bit more on maybe the handful, 5 to 7 metrics that he was focused on, we would have a clearer picture of really where we should pinpoint our focus when we're addressing this concept of churn. Things like this geographic map don't really seem to add too much value over just the bar charts in terms of where are my customers and what is the churn rate by geography, as well as these Vion plots looking at the distribution of lifetime value by customer type. So I think if we had maybe given some of these other charts a bit more space to breathe, it would be a little bit clearer story. And what already is a great dashboard, don't get me wrong, but I think minimizing a few of these to give some of our other insights a bit more room to breathe would allow us to do things like increase font sizes and make it clear that this is a churn risk, this churn risk section That font is very small when we're looking at delineating these sections here. Overall, though, I think this is a really great approach to tackling this problem. And, if anything, it's just reducing down the number of insights a little bit further to focus on, what are the key points? And the summary at the bottom is quite nice. And I think if you had almost worked backwards from this summary and just focus on these key pieces, you would have a little bit more compelling story. But overall, this is a killer dashboard. Great work, Mina.
So I'm going to jump right into my favorite part of this one, the premium internet services section. The chart on the left makes it really easy to see how churn rate is lower for customers with a higher number of premium services. I think they did a great job of simplifying this here. It's old school retention 101. The more hooks you get into a customer, the harder it is for them to say goodbye. But it's nice to see this pan out in the data so well. She made it really easy to see this, and at the same time also illustrated their higher value and like no duh, more services, higher value, but it's nice to see that visually as well. So I think that's that chart was great. The radar chart was also pretty cool. I don't necessarily think it had to be a radar chart. There's other ways you could have visualized this, but it does work well. And it made it really easy to see that there were certain premium services that were just much more likely to be taken by the non-churners and basically people that took those rarely churned. So that was really a good way to call that out. And then she had some really solid recommendations too that were based on the data. So a lot of positives here. If I were to change anything, I might choose a different chart type for the customer demographic section. The main point Brenda wanted to call out was the 65 plus age group churning at a higher rate. And not that it's extremely hard to see that, but I think there are some other charts that could have made that point a little more clearly. I felt a little distracted personally by the smaller 18 to 24 section, but this is pretty minor feedback. I'm stretching. So, I'd say this is Brenda's first time entering a Maven Challenge. She landed herself in the finals. So great job, Brenda. Congratulations.
All right. Next up is Marjolein, who is another frequent finalist in our challenge. And the first thing I noticed and that I liked from her entry is that she split her dashboard up very clearly into the areas of interest that were outlined by the challenge prompt. So she's got churn risk, then high value customers, then high value customers with a high churn risk, and then finally her recommendations, which made it very easy to kind of follow the flow that she outlined based on the prompt. Now, for the churn risks, she starts by calling out two things very clearly in the first two charts. One is that the longer the customer stays, then the lower their churn rate. And two, that the customers that were signed up on month-to-month contracts are actually 7.7 times more likely to churn than ones that are on yearly or bi-yearly contracts. Now, the third chart, I'm not as big a fan of, and that's because she's really repeating a lot of the information from the first, but she's just adding an extra metric, which is the average revenue, which, to be fair, she did notice that it actually grows as tenure grows as well. But she maybe could have incorporated that into the first chart or just used a different visual to just communicate that instead of kind of repeating the same information from the first one. Now, for the high value customers, she creates a histogram using the average monthly revenue, which is worth calling out that she actually did calculate correctly. So she didn't fall into that pitfall either. And what she noticed is that the group of 1,834 customers that pay between $100 and $125 a month are actually the ones that contribute to the most total revenue per month to the company, which makes them the most valuable in her view. So what she did next is break that group of customers into the two categories that she established, so by tenure and by contract type. I like the idea behind this for the tree maps, but then she has a very similar tree map next to it that simply switches the order of the categories and the branches. And I actually think that she could have just kept the second one in here because for me, it clearly outlines where to focus. First, on the valuable customers with no contract, which is shockingly 55% of them, because they're more likely to churn. And then from there, start with the ones that have the lower tenures first, because again, they have a higher churn risk. But her recommendations do echo the sentiments by making honestly really specific and actionable suggestions, which I do think this makes it a great entry that I it could have been a bit better by maybe getting rid of one or two charts that do make it feel a bit repetitive and kind of makes you lose focus. But a really strong entry by Marjolein, and again, a really good flow to it that really follows what we were asking for in this prompt.
So what I like most about Sadman's entry was the narrative. It has one of the most natural storytelling orders that I've seen in this challenge. It follows a clear top to bottom, left to right structure, and immediately we're introduced with his definition of what the high value customer is. Actually, surprisingly, not a lot of people did this. I was expecting some sort of either Pareto analysis or something like that. He actually went a step beyond. He introduced top customers per overall revenue, and then top customers per recurring monthly revenue, and then sort of did an intersection of the two to make his definition of what a top customer is for our company. Now he opens with top left corner, which is great. He then follows to the right to make a sort of a profile of a top customer for our company. Moving along, then we are seeing a risk assessment sort of analysis, and it's again split into two. I like what he did there. He sort of has like a summary of two key components, which he finds are the tenure and the offer. Now, to be fair, he did make an erroneous assumption about the offer quality, meaning that he assumed that the offers can be simultaneous. But a lot of people made that assumption, and I don't think it takes too much of the quality here. To the right, he made a very interesting correlation analysis. Now, this required some feature engineering. This wasn't possible to do out of the box. Congrats there. To be fair, there isn't any sort of correlation here that stands out, but he did the analysis anyway, made some conclusions based off of it. A lot of folks actually came to very similar conclusions via some other paths. This is definitely one of the more unique ones that I've seen. Finally, in the third piece, we have sort of like glance into the future. So where we started with basically who are our customers, what is their quality. He followed with the risk assessment, and now he's taking us into what's going to happen with the bottom left scatter plot and his recommendations on what to do about it. So basically, I immediately want to offer a congratulations to Sadman. This is again his first entry. We have, I think, another entry who is a rookie in our challenges. So another rookie made it to the finals. I'm sort of also noticing that I'm developing a likeness to these like simple sort of corporate looking reports with not a lot of colors, with not a lot of background noise, and I really like this one. Overall, I think it's probably the best storytelling experience that I've seen from this challenge, and for that alone, congrats, Sadman. Very well done.
All right. So what I love most about this report is just the clarity. I love that this follows a really clear story. It's got an extremely logical flow. She kind of starts with this high-level customer profile in the top left, then narrows it down to just how she's defining high-value customers, basically the top 20% of customers in terms of revenue. From there, she drills down into the root causes for customer churn. And then what I love most is that she wraps up not only by providing some actionable recommendations for the business, which were great, but she also goes a step further and quantifies the opportunity in terms of both customers and revenue. So that was just right out of the gate. It was a scroll stopper for me. Really nice flow and logical narrative here. It's also one of the best uses that I've seen for the key influencers visual from Power BI. We see a lot of times where this visual is misused or used in a way that's not very insightful. An example we often joke about is the key influencer visual telling us that the top driver for earning more revenue is to sell more products, right? Which is true, it's factual, but it doesn't really offer much insight as far as the dashboard of the report is concerned. In this case, it actually comes up with some really interesting key influencers and drivers, like the fact that contracts that are month to month instead of annual really increase the likelihood of churn. Also cases where the internet service is part of the plan or the customer is using fiber optic. Just those insights and takeaways alone can lead to some really interesting recommendations here. Love the decomposition tree visual. It's a very easy way to show kind of the top reasons or drivers. Would have loved to see the full labels there just for readability, but that's splitting hairs here. One thing I will call out is that you see in the key influencers visual that one of the top drivers is that the offer is offer E. And this would make sense if all the offers ran simultaneously. But in this case, it's actually a misleading finding because those offers A, B, C, D, E actually ran in sequence. So it's a good point to kind of pause on and remind people that in order to kind of use these visuals and use the output of these visuals, it's really important to understand the nuances of the data. And in this case, that's kind of a misleading finding. So worth calling that out. But overall, pretty minor feedback as a whole. There's so many things I love about this report. Great visuals, great layout, great use of color, nice use of Gestalt design principles, and overall, just a really impressive submission from Shameeha.
So for Cornelius's dashboard here, again, overall, really great flow. I think it's clearly broken down into three main sections, making the hit their analysis really easy to follow. Overall, I really liked how Cornelius starts off with the key takeaways, which is that if Maven Telecom doesn't act, it's likely that 80 of their high-value customers will churn in Q3, resulting in a loss of about 38K in revenue here. So great to see these kinds of numbers. Again, didn't fall into that same trap, saying that 3.8 million or whatever that exact number was, was going to churn in revenue. So I like that here. Plus, this approach also really sets up Cornelius's approach to his analysis. So if we look at the first section here, can see that we have our high value customers make up about 41% of the total customer base, but actually account for 80% of the customer or the company's total revenue. One piece of feedback here, I found that it was a little bit difficult to try to compare the kind of horizontal bars by customer segment here, and it really wasn't super intuitive, and had to kind of spend a little bit of time really trying to understand exactly what was being displayed here. So, just one piece of feedback here that could be visualized in a little bit more intuitive or digestible way. In the next section, Cornelius used the key influencer visual as well, but actually chose to use the top segment analysis instead of the key influencer analysis as part of that visual. And one of the most interesting points here is that segment 1, which is visualized in that green bar, it actually contains 8.2% of the data, which is a very addressable portion of the population that Maven Telecom could take action against. So it's really interesting way to kind of call out that number and say like, hey, there's a large section of the population here that we could, potentially impact. And then finally, in the action section, I like the use of the Pareto chart here to help the company identify the different areas that need to be improved to ultimately help reduce the likelihood of churn. Again, I think this is a really kind of intuitive way to help the company identify where some of their biggest complaints are coming from, and then their relative impact. So yeah, overall, great job, Cornelius.
All right, I'll take Lucia's. So I think this is a really great example of a diagnostic report. She starts by very clearly painting a picture of the current situation, what's going on, then drills into exactly where the problem is most pronounced, followed by why it's taking place, kind of drilling into the root cause. And then I love that it kind of follows that vertical flow, pays it all off with some really nice data-driven recommendations at the end. So really nice blueprint for a strong explanatory analysis or diagnostic report, which I think is very well suited to this particular challenge. She makes a very compelling case to focus attention specifically on San Diego. And I love that she did this because it really cuts the problem in half and gives the business owner or stakeholder a very tangible example of where to focus. And then not only focusing on San Diego, which has a very unusually high churn rate and a pretty large customer base, but then also focus specifically on the company's competitive positioning. So I thought that story was told very clearly in that middle portion of this dashboard with the 100% stacked bars and then the bar chart beneath that. A couple minor points of feedback here. I would recommend removing the offer breakdown from that last section for the reasons we've talked about, since that does lead to some misleading findings. And I'd also recommend changing those charts to 100% stacked in the bottom, just to really draw attention to that ratio of churned to retained customers. That ratio is very hard to see for some of those line items where volume is very small. Last thing I'd say, I always appreciate the Maven palette, but in this case, I think maybe a use of more intuitive colors could be appropriate here. Anytime you're dealing with data sets that feature particularly good or bad outcomes, I think using color a little bit more deliberately, like we've seen some other participants do, could go a long way. But overall, I love the structure, love the layout. I thought the general approach was really strong. So great job, Lucia, and hope to see you in the next challenge as well.
So overall, Jasmin's dashboard, it's super clean and pretty well designed here. I really like the flow where he starts off with the key takeaways and then really digs into the reasons for the churn, and then breaks out the customers into the different segments. And finally, he wraps up with next steps and recommendations. Besides the overall flow, I really liked how Jasmin did his insights for this report. So first off, looking at the key takeaway at the top, we've been talking about this a lot throughout this challenge, but the total revenue loss number here is a little bit misleading, where not all of the revenue that the customers that churn in Q3 have paid will be lost. It's only what they're going to pay, within that next quarter or over that next time period that would be lost here. So that 3.68 million number is a little bit misleading in terms of what would be lost in revenue from your churned customers. Next, kind of looking at the reasons for churn. Love how easy it is to understand some of the key reasons that customers leave, and the size of the population that's reporting these reasons. So one of the biggest takeaways here, for me, is that Maven Telecom actually has a pretty bad customer service center, and really needs to correct that immediately. The good news is that this is a very addressable area. And especially since 1 in 3 customers are reporting that they are dissatisfied with the support center, I think this is a huge area to improve immediately. And Jasmin did a great job of actually calling this out. So again, I think he did a really great job with his insights, and really focused on a couple of really meaningful things that Maven Telecom could focus on. First, I talked about conducting a competitor analysis and addressing, the, different ways that they could go about, understanding what their what their competitors are offering, and how they could potentially compete a little bit better there. And then also really hammering home that point that our customer service center is really doing a poor job, and that we are losing a lot of our customers, or that they're churning due to poor support. So again, Jasmin, great job with the insights and recommendations.
All right. Yeah, I'll talk about David's. I've got a lot to say on this one. First, I'll talk about the analysis and the dashboard. So my favorite parts are the top section and the recommendations. I liked how David laid out the profiles. Putting together personas like this can be a great way to communicate insights, and can sometimes make the data feel more real. I'm also a big fan of the top 10 reasons for leaving chart. I like the way that color was used here. It calls out the company having a poor attitude for 2 of these reasons, which I think should be an immediate focus area. The use of color here really made that insight pop. And then on the recommendation side, I like the 2-pronged approach. We've got looking to minimize churn, and then also being very specific about growth initiatives in markets where they're doing well. So leaning into those places where retention was really good, using referral bonuses there. So I thought that was great. Solid analysis all around on this dashboard. But next, I want to address something that's really important as we all continue to learn from each other and participate in these challenges together. And that's the topic of plagiarism and crediting sources of inspiration. So a couple of people pointed out to us that David took the template for this dashboard from a previous entry of Gerard's, who you guys saw earlier. We look at the 2 entries. It definitely seemed very obvious. There was no reasonable person would argue that the look and feel wasn't taken from Gerard's entry. When prompted, David acknowledged the same. He had modeled the template after Gerard's prior work. So given this, the question is that okay? And people have some different opinions on this. So some folks were really fired up that this was unacceptable. To those people, I want to say thank you for caring about this. It's a really important issue that we take seriously. I'm glad we heard from you, and I hope the conversation being had is just a good reminder to the whole community that folks should be doing their own work, and that plagiarism is a big deal. On the other side, there were people who thought this was okay. Their argument was it's a different business, a different data set, different analysis, different charts, different insights, and different recommendations. And this really is the real value that we create as analysts. So it's probably okay to borrow designs and color schemes, right? So those are really the 2 perspectives. It's a really complicated one. When we're all working on the same data set with the same goals, like how do you define where the line is between being inspired by somebody and copying their work? It's a really, really muddy thing to think about. And so we talked about the specific case a lot internally at Maven. I had a face-to-face call with Gerard to get his thoughts. And what everybody seems to agree is this would have been a much better look for David if he had just included a quick line giving Gerard a shout out for inspiring his design. This would have felt like giving credit where credit is due. And I think it would have satisfied everyone, at least that I've talked to about this. Instead, it kind of looks like he got caught trying to get away with something, and it's just not a good look. You don't want to find yourself in a situation where you're being called out for taking someone else's work, is the advice I'd give to anybody. But just a minor addition of saying, I got this from Gerard. I think that would have been much more in the spirit of community learning and inspiring each other. So I wish I would have seen that from David. I'd like to give him the benefit of the doubt and just say, and take the leap that, he meant to include a note and forgot, or that because Gerard's work has been pretty prominent here as a finalist and a winner, that it was just obvious and it was assumed that this was inspired by his work. But in any case, I think this is a learning moment for everybody. I think we at Maven owe the community some guidelines about where the line should be. And we're going to need to do some work on that. Like I said, it's a really complicated one. In the meantime, what I'd ask of everybody is just make an effort to give credit publicly when somebody inspires you. Hopefully, if you're building on the work of somebody else, you feel some appreciation for them and you feel gratitude. Like, just express that. There's no shame in saying, I saw this and I wanted to build on it, or I got inspired by this. It's the right thing to do. They'll appreciate it, and we're all doing this together. So if anybody else has questions about this stuff, feel free to reach out to me directly. I'm happy to talk about it. And that's what I've got on this one. Thanks, guys.
Thanks, John. And that actually brings us to the end of our finalists. So now that we've kind of all made our case, let's see if we can further narrow these entries down to maybe just 2 or 3 that we can then vote on to select a winner. So now that we've seen all the finalists, does anyone have any opinions, any names they'd like to put forth to kind of be entered into that vote? What does everyone think?
I'll throw a vote out there for Gerard. Thought he did a great job, understanding some of the trickier nuances of the data. Also presenting a report that visually is clean and beautiful, but also technically really strong as well. So he gets, I'd throw him into the ring as one of the final finalists.
I would agree on that.
Yeah, I agree on that too.
I'll second Gerard, and I'll maybe throw in Marjolein. She also did a really, really bang-up job. Very deliberate analysis, and very, very, very strong recommendations.
Yeah, I think so too. The more I kind of saw that one, the more I saw or noticed how she was tying all of her insights together. And like you mentioned, it was very deliberate what she included. Again, maybe I would have left a little bit of those visuals out of the final dashboard, but I do think it's worthy of including in that kind of final voting. Anyone else?
What did you guys think about Shameeha?
I really like it.
I liked it a lot. I wish that she'd caught some of the nuances with the revenue and offer E, but honestly, that would be the only critical feedback that I have. I think out of all the finalists, I think this one told the story clearest, at least to me.
I was going to say, I also think, this challenge was the first time we've seen some of these AI visuals used very appropriately, right? Where it's like the key influencers visuals here. Was it Cornelius using the same visual, but the top segments? It's like, it's a great way to actually use those visuals to get a little bit of insight and then help shape that analysis and the insight and recommendations.
All right. So let's do Gerard will be number 1 for the voting. Marjolein will be 2, and Shameeha can be 3. Does everyone have their vote ready? You guys want some time?
Very good.
I think we're good.
All right. 1, 2, 3. 1, 1, 2, 1, 1, 3. It looks like Gerard takes it. Everyone got a vote, but Gerard wins 4 to 1 to 1. So congratulations, Gerard. Let's give him a quick round of applause.
Yeah.
And I think this is actually his second time winning. He may have won the last challenge too. So Gerald will be in touch, and we'll find a prize for you since you've already got that membership for yourself. I'm sure we'll give you another one to give away, so someone can get access to our platform as well for an entire year. But congratulations once again. Congratulations to the rest of our finalists. Honestly, congratulations to everyone who participated in this challenge and continues to participate. It's been great. I mean, we've mentioned this with Gerald already. He actually added his first challenge entry into one of his own comments for this post, kind of acknowledging how much he's grown as well from when he started. It was great to see first-time entrants as finalists this time around, and I'm sure we may see them winning in the future as they continue to improve. So thanks to everyone that continues to make these challenges possible. It's honestly a privilege to be able to see all of these entries and kind of be awed by what everyone comes up with. So we're excited to see what everyone will contribute for the next one. Thanks.
Great job, everyone.